Okay. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumais, Perek Yud Dalid, Perek Yud Aleph. I'm sorry, Halacha Dalid. We're learning today Daf Kuv Gimel, and we left off on Daf Kuv Beis Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid in the beginning with the Gemara. Now the Mishnah rules that if a kohen gathers seeds of fruit with the intention of keeping them to eat, then midrabanan, those seeds will be deemed as food, which would mean that a non-kohen will not be allowed to eat those seeds. And as we mentioned, those seeds have to be partially edible for that gathering with intention to have any sort of halachic effect. And there's going to be a qualifier, but we're going to have actually a machlokes in the Gemara as to how far do we extend that rule in the Mishnah. Another part of the Mishnah that we're going to discuss today is the Mishnah was speaking about sifting flour. So there is the sifting of the flour to remove mursan bran. Bran, for sure, is not truma. The only thing is, we said that if the wheat was fresh, so some of the flour might stick to the bran also will not be allowed to be eaten by a non-kohen because there's flour on it. But the bran in itself is not considered truma. But however, when it comes to sifting fine flour, it was common that people would sift it once and then another time and then another time. And they would take from a saw is comprised of 6 kav, they would bring it down to 2 or even 1 kav. The Mishnah says that a kohen is allowed to do that. Now, make no mistake, the flour that didn't cut it is for sure truma. The chiddush of the Mishnah is that even though you would argue, who even gives you the permission to do such a sifting if what you will separate is truma? Then don't separate it. Someone accidentally might discard it. We don't say that. The kohen is allowed to do what he normally does, which is to sift it kedarkoi. So we're going to have a limit to that in the Gemara. We will also be learning about trimming vegetables of truma, trimming vegetables whose outer leaves are partially shriveled or completely shriveled. And we're going to also discuss as to what will be the status. And there's going to be a difference of opinions that has to be properly analyzed. We will also learn about a huge difference between Truma Gedoyla and Truma Smaiser. Truma Gedoyla, as we learned already in the beginning of this Masechta, is an approximate 2%. Unlike Truma Smaiser, which has to be an exact 10%, and that will play a difference in various of these halachas. Another din of the Mishnah that we're going to refer back to is that when a kohen is pouring oil out of a barrel, so when you pour it from one utensil to the other, so initially it pours, it's a stream, and then when the contents become almost depleted, you go from a stream to dripping. So the Mishnah says that after you enter the dripping phase, and 3 drops went from the original utensil into the new utensil, from that point and on, the kohen doesn't have to keep the barrel inclined. In other words, he's allowed to put the barrel back down and to fill it up with chulin, even though you know that the chulin now will nullify all of the remnant oil. It doesn't matter. That's the normal way of taking your liquid from one utensil to the other. However, it says the Mishnah, if you didn't fill it up with chulin, you inclined the barrel back down, and whatever was on the walls gathered to the bottom. The Mishnah says what's gathered in the bottom is truma. The Gemara is going to show us that the same scenario when it comes to dinei mamanis, when there's a seller and when there's a buyer, and the buyer bought the whole barrel without the utensil, so the seller is pouring it out. We're going to see that we're not going to have the same halacha, that there will be a difference between dinei isur, which is truma, versus dinei mamanis, as we'll see in the Gemara. And from there, the Gemara is going to tell you that there's also a difference between dinei truma and dinei kachim. And the final halacha today that's going to be huge is that we keep on learning, and we remember this because it's practical, that a earthenware utensil that absorbs some taste of food that we are not allowed to eat cannot be kashered. Kleicheres. And the Gemara is going to tell us that if truma was absorbed in the walls of an earthenware pot, so you have a kohen that was cooking with a kleicheres, and he put oil of truma, and there was heat, so the oil was absorbed in the walls of the earthenware utensil, that truma has a solution, and that will be to do hagala 3 times, one after the other. Doing Hagala would mean to fill up that utensil with boiling hot water and have the water spill over. Normally, we say Hagala does not help completely remove the taste of a davar ha'asur. That's true, and that's the halacha. But Truma is different. And you would think Truma is more chamor. No, Truma is more lenient. That doing Hagala 3 times will resolve the Truma being halachically completely removed from the walls of that earthenware utensil, and a non-kohen will be allowed to use that, as we will at least open up this final topic in today's daf. So, Chavra, let's go inside. Daf Kuf Beis Amid Beis. So right after the Mishnah, we are beginning with the Gemara. The first din in the Mishnah was regarding seeds. And the Mishnah pointed out, and I would just say the words that we said when we learned the Mishnah. Mida Oiraisa, no seeds are imbued with Truma. None of them are. However, Midrabanan, if the owner is actually gathering the seeds because he wants to eat them, so that intention that's being expressed through an action of gathering, says the Mishnah, midrabanan, will render those seeds truma. However, Zakti Gemara Amar Rabbi Yechanan, that is not true regarding all seeds. If the seeds aren't partially edible, even if this person plans to eat them, batla daitoi, and his gathering and his intention, even rabbinically, won't do anything. The seeds will remain chulin. But what is the Mishnah referring to? So Rabbi Yechanan gives 2 examples. One is bigal ine agasim, seeds of pears, which evidently are softish, partially edible. Or another example, the seeds of kirus tumlin. Now there is a machlokes what kirus tumlin means. Either it's a certain type of pear or it's a certain type of small apple. Be that as it may, only those seeds, dafka, because they are partially edible. Midrabanan, since the observer sees that the owner, the kohen, is gathering them and eating them, if we would allow others to eat those seeds, someone might make a mistake and somehow think that this product is not subject to truma altogether. So because of that, they said that the midrabanan it's truma. But if the seeds cannot be eaten at all, the Rab says, Rabbi Yechanan, then they will never be imbued with Kedushas Truma, not even rabbinically. So says Rabbi Yechanan. Now, Daf Kuf Gimel, Rabbi Lazar is more machmer. Rabbi Lazar includes more. Amar Rabbi Lazar, va'afilu teimar. Not only seeds of pears that are softish, but even if you have gal ine horoitev. Now, roitev refers to moist dates. Those seeds are never edible. But moist dates seeds have in them some sort of moisture that could be sucked out. I don't know exactly how to define it. So these are not edible, but people would take the juice out of those seeds. So even though the seeds themselves are b'chlal not edible, but since people suck on them, then b'mechusarim lematzmeitz, the seeds that were not yet sucked out, if they were sucked out, that's done. But since it could provide some moisture, even those seeds, again, if they were gathered by the owner, the kohen, we're speaking about the dates that were already designated as truma. And here the kohen who's eating the dates is gathering those seeds because he's going to use them. Here also we apply the din of the Mishnah that midrabanan they are truma. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work. Because the Mishnah went me'inyan le'inyan from the seeds of Truma to bones of Kachim. And I have to correct the mistake that I said when we learned the Mishnah. When we learned the Mishnah, I was thinking bones with marrow. The Mishnah was not speaking about bones that have marrow in them, because bones that have marrow in them are considered meat. Meat doesn't matter whether you gathered them or not. They have a din of basar. They for sure are imbued with the Kedusha of Kachim. And they're subject to noiser. It's a serious thing. We're speaking about bones that have no marrow in them. Again, how do you define that? I don't know. Maybe all bones have meat, but it's not considered halachic marrow. And the Mishnah said by bones also that if the kohen is gathering those bones with the intention of eating them, so says the Gemara, since our Mishnah says this is a kasha against Rabbi Lazar, v'chein atzmos hakodesh. So asks the Gemara, islach meimar b'mechusadis lamatzmeitz. Asks the Gemara, by bones, there's no such a thing as bones being dry, bones not having marrow, but you can somehow suck out moisture. That does not exist by bones. I mean, if they have marrow, they're b'chlal, the Mishnah is not talking about them. The Mishnah is speaking about non-marrowed bones. Those bones are bones that are partially subject to be eaten. Look, there's no such a thing. What is the Mishnah speaking about? Not bones that have moisture in them. There are certain bones that they themselves are soft. For example, the Rashe Kinofayim, the tips of the shoulder blades, Vahas Chusin, certain pieces of cartilage. We're speaking about parts of the ear of the animal. You can even see by a human ear. In other words, the bones themselves are soft. Since the Mishnah is comparing the seeds to the bones, it must be that what seeds are included in the rabbinic law of the Mishnah, seeds that they are themselves partially edible, like these bones that he's giving an example. Or in the other way, just like in bones, it's either edible or not edible. There's no such a thing as a bone that's not edible, but there's moisture in it. So the same thing, there's no such a thing. We argue with Rabbi Lazar. Yeah, I know that there is a metzias by these galinei horoitiv, that there is moisture in it. But the Gemara is arguing against Rabbi Lazar. Yes, like Rabbi Yechanan, those bones will not be included in the rabbinic law. And indeed, also Rabbi Bo b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, that when he learned the Mishnah, that's exactly how he interpreted the Mishnah. What types of bones is the Mishnah referring to? That if the kohen gathers it to eat, midrabanan, those bones are subject to the kedusha of kachim, berashi kenofayim, vahas chusin, and then everything is going to be symmetrical. So therefore, we refute Rabbi Lazar. We don't extend the Mishnah's ruling even to the case of those moist date seeds. Okay, moving on to the next part of the Mishnah. Subin shal chadoshes. So first of all, when you remove the klipa from the kernels, there's the klipa that's removed prior to turning the kernels into flour. And then you have the remnant of those waste parts that we call bran that are removed after you turned it into flour. That means after people would grind the kernels into flour, there would be a sifting. That sifting was done to remove the bran. Theoretically, that bran is not truma, b'chlal. That means even if the kohen is going to eat it, it's not truma, it's not flour, it's not one of the, However, the Mishnah still said that if the grain was moist, as we explained, so there's a possibility that some of the flour stuck to the bran, that bran also may not be eaten by a non-kohen. Now, how do you define fresh grain whose bran becomes prohibited to a non-kohen? It's how did you turn the kernels into flour? Now, we all know there's a mill. How do you thresh it? So there's threshing with an animal, and then there's threshing by hand. You had these sticks. Why would people not use animals? Not because they didn't have animals. Because when the grain is very fresh, animals don't do what needs to happen. It has to be beaten manually. So how do you define what type of kernels they are? How was it threshed? If it was threshed lachboit, that means it's fresh. If it was threshed by having animals trample on it, that means it's old. And accordingly, the subin will be mutter or asr to a non-kohen. That is the first opinion. Second opinion is all in a brayso. Machlokes tanoim, Rabbi Acha, amazing, tanoim. Shloishim yoim has nothing to do with how you chose to thresh it. It has to do with how many days since the harvest passed. As time goes on, the moisture gets evaporated, the moisture gets lost. It's very simple. Okay, the next case in the Mishnah was about when you're sifting flour to make the flour into fine flour. The Mishnah gave you two dinim. First of all, a kohen is allowed to do it, which is a chiddush. However, don't forget, the flour that you removed from the fine flour is bonafide truma midoy raisa. In other words, just because you're a finicky person and you want to have very fine flour, for you, let's say, if you would not have truma, even if you're wealthy and you would have thrown out the unrefined flour, if it's truma, you're not allowed to do that. You got to safeguard it because it's sanctified, it's holy. Now, on the other hand, you would think if it's sanctified, maybe you should not even be allowed to sift it into fine flour. The Mishnah says you are allowed to do it. And the measurements that the Mishnah gave is that you are even allowed to take one saw, which is comprised of 6 kav, and you can sift it until you only have 1 or 2 kav of fine flour. So Rabbi Bo, second time today, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, says the Mishnah gave that example to limit the leniency of the Mishnah. Kach hi shiyura. This is the norm, that when people are looking to make from flour into fine flour, they allow themselves to sift it so many times to end up from 6 kav with the minimum 1 kav. And indeed, since this is the normal way of producing, let's say, fine flour, a kohen is allowed to do it. However, what is Rabbi saying b'shem Rabbi Yechanan? What happens if you have a guy that wants to refine it even more? And if he'll sift it again, he's going to end up with less than 1 kav from one saw. That is something that the kohen is not allowed to do. In other words, there is a limit to this law. The kohen cannot say, I'm not throwing away the other unrefined flour. Let me do what I want to do. We don't do that. We have a fear. Our fear is that the observer who's seeing the kohen removing what for the kohen is inferior, or what might be waste, only to keep what the kohen finds to be special, maybe a non-kohen will eat the waste. That's the chashash. The Mishnah, it doesn't have such a fear, but there is a limit. That's the max. The max is, again, 1 kav from 6 kavim. Asks the Gemara, 1 second. V'atani, did we not learn in the Braisa that misales bechitim kol shehu roitza? The Braisa says that you can refine it as much as you want. As much as you want is mashma, that there isn't a limit, that beyond that you're not allowed to do that. And now we're already going me'ingen le'ingen, just like people would sift flour, not to remove bran, but to make the flour into fine flour. People would also be menakev yarak or menakev yirakis. Menakev means you would trim. So as we all know, we know this from our kitchens, that, let's speak about a cabbage or speaking about lettuce. It's not uncommon that the leafy vegetables outer layer, with some time, they get a little bit brown or they get a little bit shriveled. They're not as fresh as everyone is touching it. So again, everything here was truma. I know it's only midrabanan, doesn't matter, but it's truma midrabanan. Question is a kohen allowed to clean it out? Cleaning it out would mean that he'll be removing the shriveled layers. Same idea with the sifting of the flour. Same thing, he's allowed to do it. Whatever a kohen would normally do, he's allowed to do. And menakev v'yarik kol shehu roitza also means that we don't limit the kohen. We don't say, only if the outer ones are completely shriveled up. Only if they are brown and inedible. But if they're semi-edible, we don't do that. A kohen is allowed to eat the food the way he wants to eat it. And if what he removes remains holy, okay, so then make sure that no non-kohen will eat it. Bottom line is, how can you, when it comes to the flour, limit how much you can sift when the Braisa allows without any limitation? Answers this, Rabbi Yechanan, I'll tell you. The Braisa speaking about bima amidoy al trumasoi. The Braisa does not mean kol shehu roitze. This is important. It means you are never allowed to end up with less than 1 kav. And that is what the Braisa means. If you're going to take it down to less than 1 kav, people don't do that. And that's already, so to say, you're not safeguarding your truma, even though the kohen is going to argue, oh, don't worry, I'm not going to throw away the other parts. Doesn't matter. You're not allowed to do that. So this is a chiddush. In other words, the Braisa, which is more elaborate, more articulate, the Braisa should have said it. It's a given. Kol shehu roitze means within the norm, you can do as much as you want. Within the norm. What's the max norm? Sifting something, starting with 6, ending with 1. Beyond that, you're not allowed to do. Now, it's a doichik, right? You get it, because the Braisa says kol shehu roitze. So you have another answer. So Rabbi Yirmiyah b'shem Rabbi, he tells you the following. Our Mishnah, which does not allow the kohen to sift it beyond the limit of 1 from 6, is speaking about Shnei Ra'avain, which is amazing, years of famine. This is so practical. In years of famine, my friends, food is a lot more valuable. And it doesn't mean that if you can afford it, you can't have better food. You could, but we limit it. There is a limit. Kan, the Braisa that allows the kohen to sift it, even beyond the 1 from 6, is B'shnei Soiva, Gevaldik. Now, I just want to make it clear that regardless whether it's years of famine or years of plenty, or the way Rabbi Yechanan understands the Braisa, just to make it clear, in the case of our Mishnah, let me use these words, Ido. There's coarse flour and refined flour. The kohen can make from coarse flour into refined flour. He's going to remain with the coarse. He separates them. The coarse flour vada is truma. Even though the Braisa puts them together, I just want you to know that by the vegetables, there is a big machlokes rishonim. What will be the status of the shriveled vegetables? There is a machlokes there. And it makes a lot of sense because coarse flour is flour. Coarse flour is flour. Shriveled vegetables, I don't know where to put the line. In other words, there is a point where one says that what you removed is not food. Where to put the line, I don't know. But you can see how it's subject to a machlokes. Whether it's subjective, whether it's objective, I don't know how to look at it, but just to be aware, there's a big machlokes about that. This is very practical. I know it's not practical to me and to you right now because we're living in Chutz La'aretz, and because even in Eretz Yisrael, all of the vegetables really are, all of the trumas today are redeemed. In other words, you don't have a kohen eating truma today because the kohen is tamei. But all of this is mamash about to change. It's a big thing. It's a big deal. And the takeaway is that a kohen doesn't have to bend over backwards. The kohen gets truma, he eats it the way he normally eats it. And with a certain mindfulness of not to waste, and that to get the right balance is something that a kohen, you practice, you get it. Just sounds like it's like keeping Shabbos when you don't keep Shabbos. It sounds, what do I do? What do I don't do? You know, someone who's becoming Shemer Shabbos, it's like a big deal. Once you get used to it, it's not going to be a big deal. Okay. Since we mentioned in this Braisa the Menakev Biyarak, so let's quote a Mishnah from Masechtas Eiduyois that says the following: Tamon Taninim, there in Eiduyois, a Masechta that gathered testimonies of different Tanoim about certain laws that many people did not know of, and that's why the topics of Eiduyois are all over. It's not one Masechta; it's about testimonies about all dinim. So we have over there a Mishnah that says Me'i Avatiach, the insides of watermelons. Now, the insides of the watermelons, the way it's understood, we're not talking about the red meat. We're talking about the seeds. There used to be a day before you young guys where a watermelon taka had seeds. It's amazing. Remember those black seeds and white seeds? So, they changed it today. That's right. So let's go like this. So that's the mi'i avatiach is the seeds of the watermelon, or ukenuvas yarak, or the trimmed away leaves of truma. We're speaking both of watermelon truma and leaves of truma. What's the status of that waste? So machlokes. I'm sorry, not machlokes. I'm a tanoim. Rabdoisa mater lezarim. It makes sense. Again, the trimmed away leaves. I get you trim it away. I trim away leaves because I don't want to eat it. It's garbage for me. Don't forget, guys, vegetables to begin with is only midrabanan. You can be more lenient, trim it away. What happens if a non-kohen wants to eat it? He decides he can eat it. If you want to eat seeds, who eats seeds? Maybe when you dry them, you eat them, right? They still eat these dried seeds of watermelons. Anyways, the Mishnah is saying over here, Rabdoisa says a non-kohen is allowed to eat it, and the Chachamim prohibit, and the Gemara is going to elaborate on this machlokes. Okay? And now we're going to limit. Says Rababo b'shem Rabbi Yechanan that the Chachamim who aser loishanu ella benukuvas yorak shel ganonim. We're speaking about merchants. What does a merchant do? A merchant, all of you people in business, right? Everything is a fake world, right? You present your item in the most desirable way possible. In other words, merchants, a retailer, someone who wants to still sell the product, he's going to trim away a vegetable, even if that which he is trimming is nish geferlich. But he doesn't want, when you go to the market, you're going to look at a lettuce, at a head of lettuce, and you can see a little bit of brown, you're not going to pick that one up. No, it's they exaggerate in their trimming because, don't look at the cover, because everyone looks at the cover, everyone looks at the box. But if someone in their home trims away whatever they find to be undesirable, in your home when you're eating it, you're making the most of it. And if still you trim it away, that means it's really inedible. So whatever was removed in the kohen's home, af rabbanan moidan, like Rabbi said, this is great, that it's not food. Gewaldig. Okay, so first of all, we really limited the Chachamim stringency, and that's a great criteria. Who was the one that did the cleaning? Someone who's trying to sell it or someone who's trying to eat it? And they have opposite positions. However, Rabbun Boi, the word boi, like many times already, doesn't mean he asked. Rav Bun is making a statement, but his statement is to qualify, is to limit Rab Doisa's leniency. That what? That loy mistabra. Loy mistabra is in reference to what Rab Doisa says. Where does Rab Doisa say that which you remove from the vegetables, that the insides, meaning the seeds of the watermelon, are mutil azarim, that only fits by Truma Gedoyla, aval betrumas meiser, ein ha'olin telushin al ha'olin, wow, v'loy ha'kalachin telushin al ha'kalachim. No leaves are allowed to be plucked and discarded. Why not? So understand the following, that Truma Gedoyla, even though, first of all, Midairaisa, we already learned, right? One kernel exempts an entire pile. The Chachamim who came ahead and they gave Shiyurim, they want us to still dafke remove, let's say, the Benini 2% in approximation. So when you remove some of the Truma, imagine someone gave 10%, someone gave 2%. It means they had 100 heads of lettuce. And we're not talking about just the numbers. We're talking about approximately they were of the same size. And the coin gets out of that too. And now you're telling me that you are removing the leaves. And what is Rabbi Doisa saying? That those leaves are not truma. Now there's a problem. What's the problem? If those leaves were never truma, does that not mean that the owner did not give the right amount? No, because he gave approximate. So we are more liberal in allowing, if you trimmed it, if you don't want it, it's considered waste, it's nish truma. You're not getting into the way of the truma. You're not challenging the separator's separation. Trumas meiser has to be exact. We learned 10% is not more and not less. So we don't let you to start discounting what was discounted. Now that does mean that prior to separating, let's say in my case of lettuce, prior to separating, don't separate. You're giving a 10% from the Meiser Rishon. So you have 10 heads. Before you separate, remove that which looks to you to be completely shriveled up. In other words, that should be done on the owner prior to doing it. That's why the lashon is ein ha'olin telushin al ha'olin. By Trumas Meiser, the person who's separating already took away the leaves. And if he didn't, it's because he deemed whatever he's leaving to be edible enough. Don't challenge that. Don't say, he allowed himself to be yoitze with these half shriveled. The coin, I'm going to take it away. Don't do that. Because when you do that, you're basically saying that the owner did not give you the right amount. Gewaldig. Okay, that's one of the many other dinim. And look inside, just before we turn to Amma, look inside the last marafulda. Ein ha'olim telushin kolaymed, ein toilshin v'choyzer v'tolshin. Why is he saying twice? Because the owner, that's what part of what he's saying is that the onus of cleaning up the vegetables should never be on the kohen. The onus has to be on the owner. In other words, he's not claiming that if you have mamash rotten outer layer, brown, rotten, spoiled, he's not saying that should be truma. He's saying that it's a given that the owner who was mafresh, the trumas meiser, already removed it. And he made a determination what he is removing and what is good enough. So since that was already done, don't go further. She'im kain loy niskan ha'meiser rishain and va'af Rab Doisa moide that kol ma shechoyzer ha'koinim anakiv. So what happens if the kohen is a finicky person? The kohen says, "Listen, you balabas, you allowed yourself to give to me to be yoitze with this outer part. I don't want to eat it." The Gemara is not saying that he's not allowed to do it. The kohen can be a very finicky person. But what the Gemara is saying is that since the owner determined, the one who was mafresh, that this should be included in the Trumas Meiser, it has Kedusha. You can separate it, but a non-kohen will not be allowed to eat it. That's important. So the kohen can gift it to another kohen, the kohen can sell it to another kohen. It remains holy.
The truma maybe split up a little bit or went off a little bit. Right? Does that make it that it's dark and someone will eat it?
If it went off after the separation, that's one sugya.
Apple,
But here we're talking about prior. In other words, we're making a point prior. In other words, if the apple was brownish, fell on the floor, and that happened prior to the separation, there is a certain point where it becomes lemafreya nisgala that this apple was not the real good stuff. It's not. There is a place to say that. By Trumas Meiser, we're going to hesitate to say that. Because if we're going to claim that this apple was not Trumas Meiser, then the separator of Meiser edition did not give the right amount. We don't want to get in there. In other words, we want to back up the determination of the separator. And by Truma Gedoyla, I don't care. I have the right to say, you thought it's good, me coin, it's not good, it was never Truma. To what limit? It's very hard to put this. I mean, all of us already know. The Mishnah and Gemara, Chazal, they gave concepts. How to put it into actual behavior? Like in the Gemara, you don't have the types of shiurim that we have in Shulchan Aruch. You don't have that. When is it dark? From when the Kahanim eat. When the Kahanim eat? From when the 3 medium stars appear. That's a great example. What does that mean to people like us? We don't know what to do with that. You tell me how many minutes after Shkia we need more precise measurements. So that's what the Gaba is pointing out. How to apply this in actual, I don't know. The concept we get. Okay. Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. The Mishnah was packed, so we're going from topic to topic to topic. The next topic in the Mishnah was, you have the kohen received either wine or oil. That's what we're talking about. And he has it in a utensil. And he wants to free that utensil up. Nothing wrong with that. So he's going to pour the wine out from barrel A into a new barrel B, or oil out from one utensil into another utensil. What's the topic? The topic of the Mishnah is 2. Number 1, when you pour liquids, so there is the time where what's coming out is called a stream. And at some point, when there's almost nothing left in the original utensil, both by wine and by oil, I mean, oil is thicker, it goes from a stream into dripping. So the Mishnah gave a rule. The moment it went into the dripping phase and 3 drops fell out, the kohen is allowed to say, I emptied out the original utensil. There's a chiddush here, even though you would think to say, no, there's still oil stuck on the walls, there's oil there. The kohen can say, I emptied it out, and now what? He can fill it up with chulin, and if he fills it up with chulin, even though there was truma oil there, but now the ratio is going to be for sure more than 100 to 1. So now, b'chlal, a non-kohen can eat it. It's not considered demai. And you don't have to remove anything. But, said the Mishnah, if when he emptied out the original utensil, hirkina means he put it back down. Hirkina means he tilted it, but he means he tilted it back down. And now, umitzas. Mitzas means now the little bit of oil that was on the walls gathered in the bottom. So one is not allowed to say that since the kohen had the right to fill it up with chulin oil, therefore I can eat it. No. The kohen had the right to fill it up with chulin oil, but if he didn't, what remains is truma, midoiraisa. That's what the Mishnah said. Now the problem is that the same scenario is discussed in the context of financial law, seller and buyer. In those days, like some crazy people here, you can't get a bag in a supermarket. It used to be otherwise, or at least you have to pay for it. So what happens is you went to the market and you want to buy a liter of oil. It was very common that the buyer was the one that needed to bring the utensil of the liter. All that he bought was the content. So let's think about it. Let's say I'm the seller, you're the buyer. I'm selling to you a loig of oil. Same concept. So I have a loig full. Let's say this is a loig. You come with your empty loig, you the buyer, and you give me the money, we make a deal, and I pour it into you. Same thing. How, in other words, do I have to squeeze out the barrel? Same law. Once it goes into the dripping phase and it gave 3 drops, the seller can say, I sold you your amount. What happens if I put it back down and something remains here? Who does it belong to? The Mishnah says in Bava Basra, it belongs to me, the seller. That is in contradiction to what we learned over here. Because here we're saying that if the kohen puts it back down, that which remains truma. That which remains has the status of everything else. If that which remains has the status of everything else, if everything else was sold to the buyer, then if I put it back down, if it gathered, it should belong to the buyer. Right? Stira. Today.
Didn't we also learn that there
3
was a
drops fell.
moichel?
Huh?
Didn't we learn that we moichel onto whatever left over?
Oh, the Gemara is going to say that. Very good. That's it. In other words, financial is different. Financial has to do with there's a mechila. There's no mechila by truma. Tanina, over there in Bava Basra, we learned in a Mishnah, and not the same words. That after, in other words, the seller did what the seller needed to do. Does the seller have to stand like a goylem the whole day there? No. When it goes into the dripping, once 3 drops now, I would say an honest seller wouldn't just say 3 drops. You would wait, but there's some point you get frustrated. It's like it's never ending. You can stand for an hour and every 5 minutes another drop will come out. So now that he put it back down, he'd kinov, the seller put his utensil back down, umitzas, and now some of the remnant oil gathered in the bottom of the utensil. So says the Mishnah that which remains now belongs to the moicher. In other words, once he gave what he has to give, he's done giving. Now, if we would have said the same thing over here, we would have said, once the coin removed the truma into utensil number 2, once the coin doesn't have to squeeze the rest out, it's no longer truma. But here we don't say that. But here you're saying otherwise, it doesn't fit. Let me use different words. Do we deem the oil that remains significant or not? That's the way to word it. In our Mishnah, the fact that the remaining oil is truma means it's significant. If we would deem it significant in the laws of selling and buying, how can the moicher keep something significant when the buyer paid for it? Is it significant? Is it not significant? Amar Rabbi Yechanan answers Rabbi Yechanan, and this is a big chiddush. He found this to be so problematic. He so did not accept Yakir, what you're saying, that financial is different, which we know that. He amended the Mishnah. He says, Leis kan shel moicher. Because of the Mishnah in Trumais, because it came first or because he aligned with it, you have to read the Mishnah in Bava Basra different, the opposite. That even though the seller doesn't have to sit the whole day and have everything drip out, but if he tilted his utensil straight and what gathered is something in the bottom, it belongs to the lakeach. It's always deemed significant. Don't read the word shel moicher. That's a great solution if you have the shoulders to do it. Elo shel lakeach. Yes, it's part of the sale. There's still a chiddush. I'm the seller. I don't have to stand the whole day. Once 3 drops came out, I'm allowed to put it back down. But it doesn't mean that it's mine. It belongs to him. It's almost like you go get it. You go schwitz for it. I don't have to work for it. But to amend the Mishnah is difficult. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabbi Lazar, here's the difference. Don't amend anything. And the words are not mechila, the words are yush. It's the same concept. When it comes to financial law, once the lekeach, I'm going to the market. I have my expectation. I'm paying for a lug, and the guy is standing over there and he's emptying out his utensil, and it's already dripping, and it already began to drip into mine. Since the accepted norm was at some point the seller is allowed to stop serving me, even though theoretically that which remains is significant, I abandon hope of getting it. I have yush. And it's okay for him to stop pouring. By the way, it's okay for the coin to stop pouring here also. It's interesting, kid. You would think the Gemara would use the words mechila. We're using the word yush. There's no yush by truma. If it's truma, it's truma. If it's not truma, it's truma. No, but money is one thing, isra is something else. Now, let's use these words that the shani din isur veheter midin mamanes. So now let's ask a question by another din isur. What's the other din isur by kodesh? So if someone sanctified oil or wine for the Beis Hamikdash, are we going to apply the same din? And it's amazing that our Mishnah, beginning with the seeds, spoke about seeds and then the bones of kachim. Here the Mishnah doesn't mention kachim. Will we say the same thing? So Amar Rabbo b'shem Rabbi Yechanan that V'af b'kodesh kain. Now this is a bigger chiddush. It's even though kachim has a higher level of kedusha than truma, especially if we're speaking about items that we're going to go on the mizbeach, even there we're going to say the same thing. That once 3 drops went out, then the remaining does not have to be put on the mizbeach. Amar Rab Hoshaya. No. Hold on a second. I agree, but I want to qualify. When do we say that by kodesh we're focusing on the fact that at some point you don't have to squeeze out the barrel? That's only b'kachim sheyesh lahen matirin. Kachim sheyesh lahen matirin are kachim that doesn't have to be burnt on the altar. Like when it comes to a karban mincha, if it's not coming from a kohen, if it's coming from a Yisrael, only the kemitza goes on the mizbeach, only the levoina goes on the mizbeach, and the remnant is consumed by kohanim. Matirin means it doesn't have to be on the altar. So there's oil in there. So if some of that oil, then we say that doesn't have the highest level of kedusha. But by kachim, aval b'kachim she'ein lahem matirin. Just as an example, if someone designated wine to be part of nesachim, the wine that goes on the altar, none of it is given to the Kehanim. All of it has to be consumed, so to say, by God, by the Mizbeach. That has the highest level of Kedusha. It's called Kedushas Mizbeach. Over there, afilu kol shehu tzarech lahachzir. There we don't say the same thing. There we say that when you empty out something, nothing is allowed to be missing. Nothing is allowed to be left behind. Nothing is allowed to be left behind. It's almost like when you have the attitude of the Rebbe when it comes to Jews that are not yet observant, like no Jew left behind. It has to do with how holy do you see another Jew. There has to be a point where something is so kodesh that all of it has to be used for Kedusha. All right. I don't know how much do they have to pour it out. I don't know. I do know that Kalim of Kachim always have the problem of Noiser. All of them have the problem of Noiser. And instead of them doing Hagala, it was very common for them to use earthenware utensils, which were very cheap. It was the old discardables. And they would break it. After they would eat it, they would break it. There's remnants in Shiloh. They can find mamish of shards of klei cheres that was used in avodas hakachim. Now, the Gemara, 1 second. Rabun bar Chia boi, you're making such a difference between kachim sheyesh lehem matirin, they will be like truma, versus kachim she'en lehem matirim, the way we are interpreting it is kachim that are completely consumed by the altar. He asks the following question. I'm just going to your point. One of the areas in where oil needed to be removed from a utensil was the loik shemen shel mitzayim. So the mitzayda with this carbon, asham mitzayda, I'm talking about that carbon. We all know that he brought a loig of oil. That was a very interesting loig. Remember that? And some of that oil was put on the tenuch of his right ear and on the right thumb and on the big toe. Then the kohen would pour, very unusual, not into a new klei shadas. He would pour the oil into his left palm, and then he would go into the sanctuary. Remember that? And he would sprinkle from the oil on the paroiches 7 times. And then he would take his left hand and he would smear it on the head of the of the mitzayda. That was for kevan, zecher of the tip of the waiter. But then the remaining oil would go to the kahanim of that mishmar. So now he's asking, that tzarech lahachzir, or ain't tzarech lahachzir. You have to understand something, that if the loig of the oil that this mitzayda bought was missing even 1 drop, then what he did was not okay. So how are we to view the loig of the oil? In teimar tzarech lahachzir. If you say that every single drop has to be returned, none of it is allowed to be left in the barrel. So he's wondering what were to happen if you didn't empty it out to that point. And how do you do that? What, you stand an hour? If it's needed and you didn't return it, then you're going to have a problem, which is that oiver mishum chesrein. Then you're going to be lacking the loig of the oil. And in teimer ein tzarech lahachzir, don't say, okay, well, fine. It's not. We're saying the shirayim is given to the kahanim of the mishmar. Okay, so it's yesh lematirin. I got a problem with that, because if at some point you don't have to give it back, what happens if you allow another drop to come out? Then you're adding. See, by a loig of the mitzayda, you're not allowed to give less, you're not allowed to give more. But what happens if they did give it all to the kohanim? So then there's a problem. So what do we do? The Gemara is going to answer this. Rab Chinana. Now, first of all, finished. This, just to get it clear, what happened over here is that who asked this question was Rabbun bar Chia. In other words, Rab Hoshaya was the one that differentiated between kachim sheyesh lamatir and kachim she'en lamatir, according to this version. And Rabbun bar Chia wondered, what would you say by the loig of the mitzayda? The next version, Rab Chinana didn't have that version. Rab Chinana had the version that Rab Hoshaya himself was the one who asked that question. Amar Rab Hoshaya. First, this so far will be the same. That we are allowed to view kachim like truma. Which is wine of nesachim. And he himself, Rab Chinana's version is not that that Rabbi Shaya ben Bun, Rabun Barchia, not Rabun, Rabbi Shaya himself asked, "V'hadein loik shemen shomotzoyram loy bekachem sheyesh lamatirim v'teimar tzorach lahachser." You know, it's he himself wondered what will be the status, and he concluded, he answered this question, that the loig shemen shel mitzoyra is going to be viewed like something she'ein lahem matirin. There has to be an exact loig of oil. Hada amra tzarech lahachser. And if you taka make sure that all of the oil went to it, needed to go, you did the right thing. That's the bottom line. And if v'loy hechser, oimer mishum chesroin, it's not like truma. And let's open up the new topic. Tani Rav Chalafta ben Shaul, even though klei cheres cannot be kashered when it comes to isa v'heter, now we're beginning a whole new sugya with a big leniency. Kedera means an earthenware utensil, just as a klal. Kedera means an earthenware utensil. Shebishol batruma. We're not going to say tachnun today. That's amazing. I got a chassan, so I have my minute. Shebishol batruma. That if you cook truma, so you're going to think that what? Guys, there's no noiser by truma. But does it mean that a non-kohen can never eat out of that utensil? It's like going to a Sfardish house where they serve rice on Pesach. What do? So the din is no. Magila b'chamin shloisha pa'amim. You do hagala. Not once won't be enough. You do it 3 times. Vidayoy. Now, Amar Rabbi Ba, I agree with what you're saying, but don't misunderstand that this braisa, this Tana, is like choilik on the whole din that you can't kasher the earthenware utensil. He agrees to that. He says, even this braisa will agree that when it comes to non-kosher, you can never kasher earthenware utensil. This is a unique leniency that said regarding